Welcome again to Leadership Insights. I'm Andy Brough. It's always good to be with you. And I'm joined today by George Brough. No relation, but they say in the world there's always somebody who's either your namesake or, I don't know, a doppelganger. George is talking to us from Brazil. He's the CEO of Arthur Leadership. And George, I'm really glad that we finally got this right.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Andy.
So just tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, your background, and then we'll move on to the discussion around leadership and virtual leadership.
Great. So I've spent the last 15 years or so in the executive development group of a company called Caliper. Caliper is a global consultancy. And the type of work that we did was high potential development programs using the action learning methodology. So we worked with companies like Johnson & Johnson, NASDAQ, with their very senior leaders, the worldwide VPs and above, with business transformation projects, helping them put in practice business transformation projects and at the same time learning how to be senior executives. That was my life for about 15 years, global projects with people who have global teams, so working in that virtual environment, executive retreats, executive coaching, that type of thing. I actually started my career in London. Although I do live in Brazil, and I'm not even from London, as you can probably tell from my accent. I'm originally from Scotland, but I spent 11 years in London working with the actor John Cleese, who many people may remember from Monty Python and Fawlty Towers and things like that. He had a training video company where he used famous actors. So, Cleese himself, but people like Mr. Bean, Hugh Laurie from House. If you've ever watched any UK television from the 1980s and 1990s, those were the people we worked with. So that was a fascinating experience for 11 years, because what I discovered later was, it was a business, right? But it was a business run by creative people. And the way that they approached business was actually light years ahead of everyone else. And in fact, a lot of what people are doing now in business, a lot of what's considered best practice, is what was normal then. It was how those people went about doing business. I didn't know that. I was straight out of university. I had no idea. But it's just interesting to me to see how much of that approach has been incorporated into what's now considered best practice in leadership.
So where does that leave us now, George? You're in Brazil. What is the kind of work that you're doing based out of South America?
So the kind of work that we're doing is we help businesses with business transformation projects. So whether it's integrating a new acquisition, whether it's getting into a new market segment, whether it's improving, changing the culture of the organization, those types of big business transformation projects. But rather than, one of the big four who would come in and say, give us this project, we'll go away, we'll develop a PowerPoint and come back and deliver it to you. What we do is slightly different. We work with the people in the organization so that they create the project, right? For a couple of reasons. One is it's going to fit with their culture. And two, they're invested in the solution because it was their solution. And three, during the process of them doing that, they learn what they need to learn in order to be better executives in the business. So they come up with the solutions, but they also learn how to learn, and they learn the tools that they're going to need going forward. I mean, you and I have talked about this previously. This post-COVID world is just going to accelerate what we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years anyway, of people working in distinct geographical locations, and having to learn how to engage a team, communicate with a team, pull together a project, have accountability, have conflict, deliver on things in a virtual environment. Those are the skills that are going to be necessary. And those are the skills that naturally come out of a well-run action learning project.
So let's just talk leadership generally before we get into virtual leadership. What is your particular philosophy or view around leadership and leadership development?
A couple of things. One is you're only a leader if people are following you. And that's not your choice, that's their choice. And I think many of us forget that as leaders. We're so focused on us, our vision, where we want to take people and why people should follow me. We forget it's their choice. They will choose. And in order for them to make an informed choice, we need to focus on them and what's important to them. Your job as a leader is to figure out what your team can give you and then to get that from them. Your job as a leader is not to lament what the team cannot give you. We work with so many leaders who spend all their time complaining, my team are this and my team are not capable of that, and my team are not as good as me and not as fast as me, they're not as competitive. Doesn't matter. That's not your job. Your job is to figure out what can the team give you? What are the team good at? What can the team do? And then you give them the conditions. You put them in a position to be successful. Absolutely, to achieve what you want to achieve and what they want to achieve. I'm not talking about you forget about what your vision as a leader is, but it has to include other people, because quite frankly, why should people work and bring everything to the table that you want them to bring to the table just to achieve your vision? That doesn't make any sense. They have to see themselves in that vision. So as a leader, it's about getting a vision that they want to buy into, that they choose to buy into, and then it's helping them to be successful. Your job is just to put them in a position to be successful, and then get out the way. Get out the way, let them do the job.
It's really refreshing. So, George, let's now segue into virtual leadership. We've seen hundreds of companies around the world getting people to work out of their bedrooms, their home offices. Some of them were prepared for it. Many of them weren't. What would you say are some of the key things to be aware of? So, for example, how would different personalities, embrace the issues around performance when it comes to working virtually, from your experience?
Yeah. So first of all, giving everyone a laptop, a Zoom account, and a PDF from HR on best practices of working from home might be a necessary first step. It's not enough, as many organizations are discovering, right? The mechanics are necessary, but the difference between virtual leadership and maybe leadership in the same geographical space is magnification, right? The same issues that exist when the team is in the same physical space are magnified virtually. So if the team don't have a common goal, that's going to be magnified and they're going to be more lost in a virtual environment. If the team has difficulties communicating, it's going to be magnified. If the team has conflict, it's going to be magnified. So it's the same issues. They're just 100 times worse or 1,000 times worse. And I think when you talk about personalities, it's really interesting that, to me, this transition into the leadership, into the virtual environment is interesting because it forces people to be good leaders. And by good leaders, to me, that means understanding your people, right? You really need to know your people. So many managers have been lazy so far, right? Because when you're together in the same physical environment, it's more about management. It's more command and control. And I'm there to make sure the team are doing the right thing. I'm there to make sure the team have all the answers to the questions that they need. That's management. That's not leadership, right? You can't do that virtually. You can't. So what you need to do is leadership. And leadership is about understanding what makes your people tick. And it's different in a virtual environment, because let's say you have people in a face-to-face environment who are your A players. Oh yeah, I know my team, John, Mary, and Natasha, they're my A players, and Jim and Maria, they're just, they're slow coaches. They don't really contribute anything. And that becomes the label, and it will be like that forevermore. And then of course you translate them into a virtual environment, and all of a sudden your A players maybe aren't performing as well. Why? Well, maybe their personalities don't lend it to it. Maybe they're extroverts who feed off the energy in the office, and all of a sudden they're working in their spare bedroom, and it's driving them crazy. Their energy level goes down. Or maybe it's someone who needs the structure of working in an office and having someone kind of on their shoulders every day. And maybe they're getting lost when they're trying to organize their day in a virtual environment. But the opposite can be true. Maybe the introverts who just never had time to themselves to get the work done in the office. Maybe they're loving working in the home environment. Maybe finally I get peace and quiet to do it when I want to do it, or I can work at 11 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning, on whenever my biology says that my biorhythms say this is the best time for me to work. So what you have to do in terms of personality is you need to know the personality of people, and then you need to figure out, how do I help them use their personality in this new environment? What are the obstacles for them going to be? And what are the opportunities that they have to be successful? So think of it as a jigsaw puzzle, right? You take all the pieces of their personality and you figure, okay, which bits are going to help them here? Which bits are going to be a problem? And how can I help them avoid the problems? Which sounds really simple, but to me, that is what leadership is. And I think people are having a difficulty because they're used to managing. And when you try and manage in a virtual environment, what happens? You end up chasing after timesheets. I've heard horror stories of people saying, I'm spending 80% of my time telling my boss what I'm doing, or filling in timesheets, and I don't have time to actually do my work because the boss is still trying to command and control. You don't need to command and control if you understand what makes people tick, and if people are going after the right things. If you sent them in the right direction, if they know what they're trying to achieve, they know what they've got the resources to achieve that, then you can lead them. You don't need to manage them.
George, what would you say to managers who are needing to help to structure and prioritize adequately? This seems to be a big issue. So I'm working from home. It's really difficult to leave my personal life at the bedroom door or the office door or the dining room table. I may well have the children on the other side of that door. Yeah. How do we balance this thing of not just seeing the people in my team as workers and help them to become successful in this remote working environment?
That's a fascinating issue, and we could speak for hours on that, because companies want you to bring everything that you have to the table, right? We can't have transformative innovation unless you bring everything, right? All your experience, all your know-how, all your creativity. But with that, you bring all your baggage and all the other things that are part of your life. And there was that old kind of mindset in many organizations where, when you step through the office door, you leave your personal life at home, right? And then they wondered why they were only getting 50% of the creativity that the people would bring. So, because you asked them to leave half the stuff at home, right? So here's a mindset change. Accept people holistically for who they are, for everything they have, right? They have different roles in life. They might be parents, they might be spouses, they might be caregivers, they might be friends. They have a whole universe that they bring to the table. Part of that universe they offer to you, right? But you need to accept it's only part of the universe, and you need to help them balance those other things, right? You need to help them see, because sometimes at work, especially high potentials, they fall into this trap of thinking, I need to give 100%. So what happens is they try to give 100% at work, and 100% as a wife or as a husband, and 100% as a parent, and we only have 100%. So they burn out. You need to help your people say, okay, it's okay to balance these other roles, to bring these other roles in. And the way to do it in really practical terms, really, really practical terms, as a leader, you focus on what's the result that you want, right? What's the acceptable result, right? What's the quality of work? What's the time frame? And then, as much as possible, get out of their way in terms of the how they do it, right? Help them figure out how to do it, right? I'm not going to tell you, if you have a podcast that you need to deliver at 5 p.m., I'm not going to say to you, you need to get up at 10, you need to start writing your script, then you need to do some research. I'm not going to say it. I'm going to say, Andy, you have a podcast at 5. This podcast, you need to be well prepared for it, right? Preparation includes doing research, having some sort of script. Then I'm going to say, go figure out how to make that work, right? And let me know how I can help you. But I'm going to focus on the result that I need from you. And then I'm going to let you fit together the pieces. If you need to take your kid to, out to play soccer for an hour, go do that. As long as you turn up at 5 o'clock, totally prepared and with a script for the podcast. And that's what leaders need to do. They need to help people figure out how do they organize themselves and how do they structure a process that allows them to deliver what the leader needs them to deliver.
So, George, you talk about giving up the illusion of control and really demonstrating trust in your people, not just being about words, but actually actions. Is virtual trust different than it is when we work face to face, would you say?
I would say it's just more to the forefront. I mean, you can kid yourself in a face-to-face. Every leader says they trust their people, right? And it's the number one thing you hear when you must do this when you go into team interventions. Oh, of course I trust my team, except that blah blah blah. It's like, I'll tell you a true story, right? Very quick true story. I worked with a team of very, very senior executives in a big multinational organization. 24 executives working on a year-long program. And the first day that they were together, we kind of let them just do their thing to see what was working for them and what wasn't working for them. And they set some ground rules. And the first ground rule is we all trust each other as a team. Absolutely, we all trust each other. That's wonderful. They're working through the afternoon, and we said to them, decide when you want to have a break. We're not going to break for you. Right? You decide when you have a break. So they got to like 2:45, and someone said, energy levels going down, we need to have a break. And a couple of them said, yeah, well, let's agree with that. And a couple of others said, no, let's just finish this one thing and then we'll have the breaks. Okay, so they roped them back in. Another 15 minutes passed, and now like half the team were saying, actually, we're not getting anywhere with it. Let's have a break. Almost broke, and then a couple of people said, no, we absolutely need to hammer this out. It took this team of senior executives 1 hour and 8 minutes to decide to go and have a 15-minute break, because they didn't trust each other to either keep working, a couple of them on their own, or that really it was a time to have a break because other people needed it. So trust is something that everyone says they have. They often demonstrate that they don't. I think in a virtual environment, it becomes really obviously really quickly, as I said, that you have to trust people, because when you try to control them, right, by timesheets and stuff like that, it just becomes obvious that you're trying to put your arms around the ocean, right? It's just impossible, right? So I think what it does, the good thing is it just brings it to the surface quicker and just basically says, hey, you need to deal with this because nothing's going to happen until you deal with it. So, all right, let's deal with it. And then what's fascinating is once they deal with it, everything else runs so smoothly. Once you really do trust your people and they trust you and they trust each other because they know each other, things just work so quickly and so smoothly. And that's just one final point that I want to make to people is we're not talking about this theoretically. This isn't a nice to have in this ideal world. This is how these great teams that we run transform businesses, right? The results of the projects that we do makes people's jaw drops, right? Senior leaderships in NASDAQ and Johnson & Johnson turn around to these teams and say, I don't believe that you were capable of doing this. We knew you were great. We didn't believe you were that great. And the reason is because this stuff works. It's not a nice to have. It's an absolute must have. It's not an extra layer onto things. It's actually what's going to grease the wheels. It's what's going to make your team work effectively. And the results will be 1,000 times better than your current results. I absolutely guarantee it.
George, you said earlier that the channel of working virtually doesn't create the problems, it simply amplifies them. But I'm going to ask you to give us, in closing here, 3 best practices for virtual teams. What would you tell us?
Get the team on the same page as to what they're trying to achieve, right? And it has to be everyone's choice, right? You cannot decide for the team what the team's objective is. It's a self-selection process. The team decides, am I invested in this? Do I want to achieve it? Now, it can be a Venn diagram, right? Everyone can have their own individual objectives as well, right? You think about it as like a rugby team, for example. Our objective might be to win the championship, But, each individual player might have an objective for, number of tackles that they, maybe even in their contract, the number of tries that they score or number of tackles that they make. You can have individual objectives, but there's an overall team objective that everyone has signed up for. So each individual in the team needs to specifically and explicitly sign up for the objective in common. That's the first thing. The second thing is everyone needs to know what part they play in achieving that. They need to know what are the skills, abilities, experiences that are going to be valued by the team in order to achieve that goal. Okay? And then the third thing is that everyone needs to value the skills, abilities, and experience that everybody else brings. Right? So everyone needs to have a part, and everyone's part needs to be valued. If you spend time at the beginning, and by time I mean you can do this in an hour, a couple of hours, it's not long, right? If you do this at the beginning of your project, the rest of it will flow so much easier.
George, we have the same surname, we have the same birthplace, and we have the same interests in leadership. It's been really fascinating, and although we're separated by the Atlantic Ocean, just fascinating to hear your thoughts on leadership. George Brough, thank you so much for being part of this conversation today on Leadership Insights. Great to have you with me.
Thank you, Andy. See you next time.